Hey, it's Nathan. Before I tell you this one, I want you to sit with a question, because the whole story turns on it. When something bad happens in your town, who answers the phone? Not the president, not a governor, a dispatcher you've never met, a paramedic who lives 4 streets over, a coroner whose name is on a yard sign every 4 years. In most places, that's a beautiful thing. It's neighbors covering neighbors. But there are counties in this country where all of those jobs belong to one family, and when that happens, the truth stops being something you discover. It becomes something they issue. Today's story is about a man who spent 19 years overseas doing a job almost nobody understands. He didn't kick doors. He didn't fly anything. He watched. He collected small, boring, forgettable details about a person until those details formed a shape, and then he handed that shape to men who acted on it. He was, in the plainest language, a professional noticer, and he came home from a rotation to find that the only person he'd ever loved without conditions had spent 2 years leaving him a message in a code he'd taught her himself. Stay with me, because the part everyone remembers isn't the revenge, it's the sealing. The last thing Roan Kittredge did before he left the compound was hand his rifle to a 19-year-old and lie about how long the flight was. He had learned a long time ago that the honest answer, 31 hours, if the weather held, and it never held, made men count. Counting made time swell. So he told the kid it was a short one, took his bag, and walked out to the pad in the pale gray light with the dust of another country still gritted into the creases of his knuckles. Roan was 38 years old, and had spent 19 of them in a unit that did not appear on any organizational chart a civilian would ever be shown. People assumed, when they finally pried a fact or two loose from him, that he was a shooter. He let them. It was easier than the truth, which was that Roan Kittredge was, in the vocabulary of his profession, a targeting sergeant. He built pattern of life. That was the phrase, pattern of life. It meant that when the men upstairs needed to know a stranger, Roan sat with everything that stranger left behind. Phone metadata, market receipts, the angle of a satellite dish, the 4 minutes every Tuesday when a certain gate stood open, and he assembled it into a person. Not a profile, a rhythm, where he slept, who he trusted, what he was afraid of, which day of the month made him careless. Nobody in his line of work chased anybody. Chasing was for movies. What you did was learn the rhythm, and then simply be standing where the rhythm was going to put him. A life leaves a pattern, his first team sergeant had told him, 100 years ago. Everybody thinks they're random. Nobody is. Be patient enough to read it, and a man will walk you to his own front door. He had used that sentence on strangers in 6 countries. It had never once occurred to him to use it at home. The flight was 34 hours. He slept through most of it the way soldiers do, upright and shallow, and woke over Indiana to a wing full of hard white winter light. Below him, the fields ran out flat and frozen in their long gray corduroy, cut through with the black scribble of the creeks, and somewhere down in all that geometry was Yerby, population 1104, where he had a wife named Artis, and a 9-year-old daughter named Maribel, and a small yellow house with a porch he had never finished. He had not spoken to Artis in 11 days. That was not unusual for a rotation. What was unusual, and what had been sitting under his sternum like a swallowed stone since a satellite window 3 days ago, was the last text she'd sent. Mari has a bug. Don't call. She's sleeping. Love you. Artis Kittredge did not write love you. She wrote okay, and she wrote fine, and once, memorably, she had written we'll talk when you're back, which had cost him 4 months of sleep. Love you was somebody performing normal for an audience. He'd read it 40 times at 35,000 feet. He'd made himself stop. At Indianapolis, he came off the jet bridge in civilian clothes with a duffel over one shoulder, and his phone finally, fully alive, and it began to buzz before he cleared the gate. 11 voicemails, 9 of them from numbers he didn't know. 1 from his sister Cammie, 1 from a 317 area code that turned out to be a woman with a very steady voice who identified herself as Keturah Nagel, night charge nurse, pediatric intensive care, Kirtland Children's Hospital. Mr. Kittredge, the message said, I'm calling on my own time, and I'd appreciate you not saying that to anyone. Your daughter's been on our unit since Sunday. I've called the number listed for next of kin 4 times, and been told each time that you're unreachable. You're the father, and you should be here. A pause. In the background, the flat electronic patience of a monitor. Please come. Roan stood in the middle of a concourse in Indianapolis, Indiana, with people flowing around him on both sides like water around a post, and he did not run. 19 years had ground running out of him. What he did instead was open his notebook, a cheap green field notebook, the kind you buy at any gas station, and write down the time, the date, the words she'd used, and the words she had carefully not used. Sunday, 4 calls, unreachable. Then he walked, very fast, to the parking garage. The PQ at Kirtland occupied the 5th floor, and it was quieter than any place with that much machinery in it had a right to be. A woman at the desk asked who he was. He told her. Something crossed her face and left again. I'll page Dr. Bishara. Soline Bishara was a small woman in her 50s, with her hair pinned back so tightly it looked like an act of discipline. She came down the corridor already reading him. The boots, the bag, the 4-day beard, the stillness, and she did the thing that told Roan more than any chart could have. She looked around before she spoke. You're the father. I am. Have you been in the room yet? No. Then I'm going to talk to you out here first. She stepped in close enough that he could see the broken capillaries at the edge of her nose, and she dropped her voice to almost nothing. Your daughter came in Sunday afternoon by ambulance, with a subdural hematoma and a flail chest. She is intubated, she is sedated, she is stable, and I want you to hold on to that word. She swallowed. We did a skeletal survey Monday morning. That's a full-body X-ray, every bone, standard of care in a case like this. We do it looking for 1 or 2 old injuries. And? That Dr. Bishara's mouth moved before the sound came. 38 fractures, she whispered. All different ages. Some are 22, 24 months old. Some are 8 weeks. 2 are healing right now. Mr. Kittredge, this didn't happen. This took months. This took years. There is a moment in a certain kind of man where the floor of him drops away and something older stands up in the hole it leaves. Roan had felt it 3 times in his life. He felt it now, and what came up out of the hole was not heat. It was a terrible, level cold, and with it came the only reflex he had left after 19 years. Collect. Everything. Starting now. Say that again, he said, slowly. I want the number, and I want the ranges. Dr. Bishara stared at him. Please, Rowan said. I'm not going to fall down. I need it written correctly the first time. She said it again. He wrote it in the green notebook in small square capitals, the way he had written 1,000 target packages, and when she got to the part about the 2 healing fractures, he did not let his pen stop. Then he asked to see his daughter, and he went in. Maribel Kittredge was 9 years old and weighed almost nothing under the blanket. There was a tube in her mouth held with white tape and a line in her small hand, and someone had put her hair into a braid, which meant that some stranger in this building had taken 4 minutes to be kind to her. Her left eye was the color of a plum. Her right arm was splinted from wrist to elbow. Roan stood at the rail for a long time without touching her. Then he leaned down and put his mouth close to her ear and said the only thing he could think of that would be hers alone. Hey Mari, it's Dad. I'm home. Ceiling check when you wake up. The monitor did not change. He had not expected it to. He straightened, put his hand flat and light on the blanket over her ankle, and turned to leave the room. And that was when he heard, through the door, out in the corridor, the unmistakable ordinary sound of people laughing. He knew the laugh. He'd known it for 14 years. Artis was leaning against the wall by the vending machines, a paper cup of coffee in her hand, in a green cardigan he had bought her. Around her stood her 3 brothers. Kester, the oldest, still in the navy uniform shirt with the chief's collar pins, saying something with his hands. Quaid, thicker every year, laughing with his head back. And Torin, the youngest, 33, still built like the state champion wrestler he had been at 18, holding the vending machine door with his hip and telling the punchline. Roan stood in the doorway of his daughter's room and watched his wife laugh into a paper cup. He counted them. He noted the time. He noted that all 4 of them had come, that none of them were inside the room, that none of them looked toward it, that Kester was wearing a duty shirt on a Thursday afternoon, and that Torin's right hand was wrapped in a wrist brace of the kind you buy at a pharmacy. He wrote all of it down before he said a single word to any of them, because a life leaves a pattern, and 4 of them had just walked out into the open, laughing, and shown him theirs. To understand why nobody in Donegan County had stopped it, you have to understand who answers the phone there. Yerby, Indiana, sits in the northwest corner of a county with more grain bins than stoplights. There is 1 pharmacy, 1 grocery, 2 churches, and a squat brick building on County Road 9 with a hand-painted sign that reads Ottinger Medical Transport and, underneath in smaller letters, serving Donegan County since 1978. Ephraim Ottinger had built that. He was 66 years old, with a wide farmer's face and a handshake he used like a tool, and he had won every election he had ever entered. He owned the ambulance service, which held the county's contract. He owned the building the 911 dispatch center rented. And for 28 years, without a single opponent on the ballot, Ephraim Ottinger had been the elected coroner of Donegan County. That is a fact people from cities do not believe when they hear it. In Indiana, as in a lot of states, the coroner is an elected office and does not require a medical degree. In Donegan County, it required only that you be an Ottinger. If a person died in that county in a way that raised a question, the man who decided whether the question got asked was Ephraim, and the men who wrote the report of how they'd found the body were his sons. Kester was 41 and ran the ambulance service day to day. He was a good paramedic. That was the awful part. He could hold a scared 80-year-old's hand and talk her heart rate down, and he wrote a clean, confident narrative in every patient care report he'd ever filed, and the county believed those narratives the way it believed the weather. Quaid, 39, never rode. Quaid sat in the back office and ran the billing, through an LLC in his wife's maiden name called Redbird Billing Solutions, and he had also, 4 years earlier, quietly won the contract to staff the county's dispatch console overnight. Quaid decided which calls became records. And Torin, the youngest, coached the Yerby Youth Wrestling Program out of the rec center, 41 boys and girls, ages 6 to 14, 3 nights a week from October to March. Their mother, Tildy, ran the benevolence fund at Second Redeemer and had a phrase she used, gently, at potlucks, about children. They come in crooked, you straighten them while the wood's green. Roan had met Artis Ottinger when he was 22, home on leave, sunburned and stupid and standing at the edge of a bonfire on somebody's harvested field. She was the brightest thing in a dim place. She read books nobody else in Yerby read. She had a laugh that made you want to have said something funnier. And she had. He had understood even then the specific shining hardness of a girl who has decided that she is going to get out. He had thought he was the way out. He'd married her at 24 in a courthouse in Terre Haute, and for a few years, on and off, in the gaps between rotations, it had almost been a life. Mari was born when he was 29. He'd made it back for 9 hours and held her on the vinyl chair in the hall. And then the thing that happens to that kind of marriage happened. He kept leaving. She kept not leaving Yerby. And somewhere in the 3rd or 4th year, without either of them saying a word about it, Artis had stopped being a woman who was escaping her family and started being a woman who was managing one. He learned the rest of it in the first 30 hours, and it came at him in the flat, apologetic way that bad news arrives in small counties. Mari had not been in school since the 2nd grade. Artis had pulled her and enrolled her in the Yerby Classical Fellowship, a homeschool co-op that Artis herself administered, that met in the fellowship hall of Second Redeemer, and that filed exactly the paperwork the state of Indiana requires for such a thing, which is almost none. In 2 years, Maribel Kittredge had not been seen by a teacher, a school nurse, a counselor, a coach, or any other adult in the state legally obligated to report what they saw. Except twice. Someone had called the child abuse hotline about the Kittredge girl. Roan learned that from a detective. Dermot Coyne was 54 and worked major crimes for the sheriff's department out of an office with a window that didn't open. He had a gray mustache and the posture of a man who had been leaning on the same doorframe for 20 years. He heard Roan out for 11 minutes without writing anything down, which Roan noticed, and then he sat back. 38, Coyne said. 38. The hospital referred it to us Monday. It'll come to me Friday. Coyne's eyes went to the window that didn't open. You want me to tell you what happens Friday? I'd like that, yes. Friday, I open a file. Monday, I request the ambulance run report, and I get one, and it'll be perfect, because Kester writes them. Tuesday, I request the CAD records from dispatch to see if there were prior calls to that address, and I get what Quaid gives me. Wednesday, I call the Department of Child Services, and I get the caseworker assigned to this county, who is named Imelda Brackett, and who is the sheriff's brother's wife. He held up a hand before Roan could speak. In 4 weeks, I write a report saying the injuries are consistent with the caregiver's account. In 8 weeks, the prosecutor declines. That's not me guessing. That's me remembering. I have done this exact thing 3 times. 3. That I know of. Coyne looked at him then, and Roan saw something in the man's face that he had seen in the faces of interpreters in villages where the wrong family had the guns. It was not indifference. It was a kind of exhausted grief wearing indifference like a coat. 2 hotline calls on my daughter, Roan said. Who made them? Anonymous, both. Screened out at intake. There's a note on the second one. Coyne recited it from memory, which told Roan everything about how many times the man had read it. Reporter declined to give name, stated she is afraid of the family. No further action. Roan sat very still. So here it is, Coyne said, and he leaned forward and put both forearms on the desk and said the sentence Roan had come 3,000 miles to hear somebody finally say out loud. They're protected. Every road you drive down in this county ends at that family. The reports, the records, the death certificates, the dispatch tapes, the caseworker, the sheriff. It isn't a conspiracy. It's a plumbing problem. Everything drains to the same place. He shrugged, and it was the smallest, most defeated motion Roan had ever seen a grown man make. Nothing sticks. It never has. Roan stood up. He tucked the green notebook into his jacket, and he put his hand out, and Detective Dermot Coyne shook it, and Roan said, "It won't matter. I wasn't planning on paperwork." He was 2 steps from the door when Coyne said, "Kittredge." Roan turned. The detective had opened his bottom drawer, and he sat looking down into it the way a man looks into a well. "When you get to the part where you need somebody who's been keeping score," Coyne said, "come back." That night, at 0340 local, Roan sat in his truck in the hospital parking garage on level 4 and called a number that rang in a windowless room in North Carolina, and Lieutenant Colonel Ulrich Halstead picked up on the second ring, because he always did. Roan told him in 90 seconds, without adjectives. There was a silence on the line long enough that Roan checked the screen. "How much leave do you have accrued?" Halstead asked. 61 days. "You have 90. A pause. "Sergeant, do you need people?" Roan looked out through the windshield at the concrete and the sodium light and the small square of Indiana night beyond it. "Not yet," he said. "First I need to read it." The small yellow house on Ketch Road was empty at 9 in the morning, because Ardis was at the hospital being a mother where people could see her. Roan let himself in with his own key, into his own house, and stood in the kitchen for a full minute doing nothing but looking, because the first rule of reading a place is that you get exactly one first look at it, and you cannot have it twice. Dishes in the rack, dry. 2 coffee cups, not 3. A calendar on the refrigerator with the co-op schedule in Ardis's small handwriting. On the counter, a stack of mail with the top envelope opened and refolded. An explanation of benefits from a Medicaid-managed care plan. He photographed it without touching it. There was no evidence of a 9-year-old anywhere in the front of that house. No shoes by the door, no cereal bowl, no drawing on the refrigerator. It had the staged, wiped feeling of a rental between tenants, and Roan had walked into rooms like that overseas and known, before anything else, that somebody had cleaned. Mari's bedroom was at the end of the hall. It was small and cold, the vent taped half shut, and the bed was made with a tightness no 9-year-old produces on her own. Her books were on the shelf in order. There was a laundry basket with 3 shirts folded in the bottom, all long-sleeved, in August. And when Roan sat down on the end of her bed and looked up, the ceiling was full of stars. He had put the first ones there himself, 7 years earlier, on a Tuesday, before a deployment that was supposed to be 4 months and turned into 11. He'd bought a bag of the cheap glow-in-the-dark plastic stars at the Dollar General on Route 30 and stuck a handful over her bed, and he had told her the thing you tell a 2-year-old that turns out to be the thing you have told them forever. 1 star for every night I'm gone. You put it up. When the ceiling's full, I'm coming home. And if you ever need to tell me something and I'm not here, you tell the ceiling. I'll read it when I get back. Over the years, it had become their whole language. He'd come home to constellations. He'd come home to a spiral. Once, at 6, she'd made a lopsided ring of them and told him solemnly that it was a fence to keep the bad dreams out, and he had lain on the floor of that room with her for an hour and let her explain the gate. Now the ceiling was crowded, hundreds of them, 7 years of nights, a dense pale scatter from the window wall to the closet, and scattered through them were the red ones. He didn't understand at first. The plastic stars came in one color. He got up on the bed in his boots, which he would have apologized to her for, and put his face 6 inches from the ceiling, and saw that the red stars were the same stars. She had colored them, with a red marker, carefully, all the way to the points, some of them gone over twice so hard the marker had bled onto the paint. Roan stood on his daughter's bed in an empty house and counted. It took him 4 passes to be sure, because they were not grouped, and because 2 of them were half hidden behind the light fixture. When he was sure, he stepped down, and he sat on the floor with his back against her bed, and he put his hands over his face for exactly as long as he allowed himself, which was the time it took to breathe 8 times. 38. He was on his feet with the phone up before the 8th breath finished, photographing the ceiling in a grid, overlapping frames, corner marks, the way you shoot a scene you may never be allowed back into. Then he went and got the stepladder from the garage and a roll of blue painter's tape, and he did the thing that no one in Dunnigan County would ever have thought to do, because it required believing a child. He numbered them. Every star on that ceiling, red and white, got a small numbered tab of blue tape beside it, and every number went into the green notebook with its position on a hand-drawn grid. Then he took the bag of remaining stars out of her desk drawer. She had kept it, of course she had, in the drawer with the good pencils, and he checked the bag against the receipt still folded inside it. She had bought them in bulk with birthday money. She had been rationing them for years. It took him 5 hours. He worked through it the way he had worked through phone records in a plywood room in another hemisphere, and when it was done, he had 206 white stars and 38 red ones, and a number for each, and no idea yet what the numbers meant. He found the rest of it in the basement. The stairs were the open kind. At the bottom, past the water heater, someone had set up a corner, a rubber mat, 4 feet by 6, of the type used in wrestling rooms, and a low wooden bench, and on a nail on the joist above it, a jump rope. The mat had been scrubbed. The bench was old and the varnish was worn through in 2 patches at exactly the width of a child's forearms. Roan looked at that bench for a long time. Then he heard the front door. Tildy Ottinger came down into her daughter's basement without turning on the light, because she knew the stairs, and she stopped 4 steps up when she saw him standing by the mat. "Roan," she said, pleasantly, "we didn't think you'd get leave." "I got leave. It's a blessing." She came down the last steps and stood with her purse over her forearm like a woman at a bake sale. She was 64 and small, and her hair was set. That child has been a worry for 2 years. She's headstrong. You know she's headstrong. "Tell me about the bench." "That's Torrin's mat. He works with the little ones." She wanted to learn. Tildy's eyes went to it and came back, and they were perfectly clear. "You were gone, honey. Somebody had to teach her something." 38 fractures, Roan said. Children fall. He looked at his mother-in-law and understood, with a clarity that would stay with him for the rest of his life, that she was not lying. She had said children fall the way other people say bless you. It was not a cover story. It was a liturgy. Somewhere behind her, generations back, someone had built this and handed it down, and it had been carried into this house and set up in a basement corner with a rubber mat, and everybody in the family knew where it was, and nobody in the family had a word for it except discipline. "Where's Artis's calendar?" he asked. "Her what?" "She keeps one. Paper. She always has." Tildy smiled at him with real warmth. "You should go be with your daughter," she said. "That's where a father belongs." He left. He drove 9 miles and pulled into the lot of the closed feed store and got out the green notebook and the photographs and worked, hunched over the steering wheel until the light went orange. The red stars weren't random. He had assumed, all afternoon, that they'd be a rough scatter, that a hurt child marks a night when she can. But when he laid the numbered grid against the calendar of his own deployments, which he could reconstruct to the day because the army keeps better records of a man's absence than of anything else, the shape came up out of the noise the way it always did, all at once, the way a face comes out of static. The red stars clustered, not around holidays, not around his departures, around the 15th and the 30th of the month. Roan Kittredge sat in a truck outside a closed feed store in Yerby, Indiana, and looked at the pattern his 9-year-old daughter had left on a ceiling for a man who reads patterns for a living, and he said, out loud, to nobody, "That's not a temper. That's a schedule." Dr. Marlon Vossler was a pediatric radiologist at Kirtland with a reading room the size of a closet and a habit of talking to images as though they could hear him. He was 44, and he had spent 11 years learning to do a thing very few people can do, which is to look at a healing bone and say how old the break is. "You want the ranges," he said, when Roan sat down beside him. "I want the dates." "I can't give you dates." "You can give me windows. I'll take windows." Vossler looked at him for a moment, then turned back to the monitors and did something Roan would remember for a long time. He cracked his knuckles, the way a man does before real work. They were in there 5 hours. A fracture heals in stages, and each stage leaves a signature. In the first week, there is nothing to see but soft tissue swelling. By 10 days, the edges begin to resorb, and a thin fuzz of new bone, the callus, starts to bloom. By 3 weeks, the callus is dense and obvious. By 6 to 8 weeks, it begins to smooth and remodel. And by a year, in a child, it may be nearly invisible, a faint thickening you would miss if you weren't hunting. Vossler hunted. He put them in order, oldest to newest, and Roan wrote them all down in the green notebook, in columns. 9 posterior rib fractures on the left, in 3 distinct age groups. Classic metaphyseal lesions at both distal tibiae. Corner fractures, Vossler said, the kind that come from a limb being yanked or twisted, almost never from a fall. A healed spiral of the right humerus at least 20 months old. A buccal fracture of the left wrist, 4 months. 2 fractures of the right ulna, 11 months apart, at the same point, which meant the second had broken the repair of the first. And the newest, the flail segment, 3 ribs, days old, and a linear skull fracture that had bled into the space beneath it and put her on a ventilator. 38, Vossler said at the end, and rubbed his eyes with the heels of his hands. In 11 years, I have seen one survey worse than this, and the child did not live. Whoever did this stopped short every single time. Do you understand what I'm telling you? This isn't rage. Rage doesn't stop. Somebody was measuring, Roan said. Somebody was measuring. Roan went back to the motel on Route 30 and taped a sheet of butcher paper to the wall and built the thing he had built 400 times in his career, and never once for a person he loved. Left column, the 38 windows from Vossler. Middle column, the 38 red stars, in order, with the numbered grid. Right column, blank. He worked until 3 in the morning fitting the ceiling to the bones, and they matched, not perfectly. A child's marker is not a radiologist, but 19 of the 38 lined up inside their windows, and none of them contradicted. When he was done, he had 38 approximate dates spanning 26 months, and he sat back on the bed and looked at the middle column and understood, for the first time in his life, that he was reading a document his daughter had written to him while it was happening. 2 days later, the right column filled itself in. It came from Effie Ottinger, who was 17 and Kester's oldest, and had been an EMT cadet in the county's Explorer program since she was 15, because it was what you did if you were an Ottinger. She met Roan in the parking lot of the Casey's in Artis's old car, and she wouldn't get out of it, and she wouldn't look at him. "I'm not testifying," she said. "I want that clear. Nobody's asked you to. Everybody's going to ask me to." She had her hands at 10 and 2 on a parked car. "You know what Grandpa says about you? He says you're a man who's very good at a very small thing. He says that at dinner. He's said it for years. He's not wrong." She laughed, once, badly. 2 years ago, I started riding third on the truck, Effie said. Just observing. You do a lot of paperwork on a rig. The report's called a PCR. Every run gets one, even the ones where nobody goes to the hospital. Those are refusals, or no transports, and they still generate a record, and the record still generates a bill. She swallowed. In February, I pulled a run number for a training thing. Wrong number, off by 1. What came up was a no transport at 4412 Ketch Road. Roan did not move. Your address, she said. 14 months before. Patient, female, 9. Chief complaint. Quote, child fell from playset, evaluated, no transport, released to guardian. Signed by my dad. She was crying now, without any sound at all, the way people cry when they have practiced not being heard. So I pulled all of them. There are 41 runs to your address in 26 months. 41. And every single one is a no transport. And every single one is billed. Billed to who? Medicaid. Through Redbird. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist. Uncle Quade's company. A response with assessment and no transport bills at a set rate. It's small money per run. It's real money at volume, and it's almost never audited, because nobody in the world audits an ambulance that didn't take anybody anywhere. Roan sat with that. Out in the lot, a man was filling a mower can. The sun was going down behind the grain elevator, the way it had every evening of his childhood. The 15th and the 30th, he said. Effie's head came around. How do you know that? Tell me first. That's the submission window. She said it flat, like it hurt her mouth. Redbird batches claims twice a month. If a run isn't in the batch by the 15th or the 30th, it sits another 2 weeks. There it was. Roan Kittredge understood in that parking lot that his daughter had not been beaten by an angry man who lost control. She had been beaten by a business, on a billing cycle, twice a month, for 26 months, by people who stopped just short of the hospital every time, because a hospital creates a record that other people can read. Torin's hands did it in the basement on a rubber mat. Kester's rig came and did not take her anywhere. Kester's pen wrote that she fell. Quade's office turned the page into $41 and change. Artis made sure no teacher ever saw her arms. And Ephraim, if it had ever gone all the way, would have been the man who decided whether a question got asked. 38 fractures, 38 red stars, 41 invoices, 3 separate ledgers, kept by 3 separate hands, and every one of them said the same thing. Effie, he said, did you keep copies? She stared out the windshield for a long moment. I'm 17, she said. I have 11 months of PCRs on a thumb drive in a tampon box in my closet, because I'm 17, and I'm not stupid, and I've been waiting 2 years for one adult in this county to ask me that question. A smarter man than Roan would have gone straight to the federal government with what he had. Roan did something that looked, to everyone watching, much stupider. He filed. He hired a family attorney out of Lafayette named Rowena Stapp, and he petitioned for emergency sole custody of Maribel Kittredge, and he attached Dr. Vossler's dating of the injuries, and he did it loudly, in the county courthouse in Dunnigan, on a Tuesday morning, in front of a clerk who was Tildy Ottinger's second cousin. He knew what would happen. That was the point. Because there is a rule in his trade that civilians never learn, and it is this. You do not get to see a network's real shape until you make it move. A hidden structure looks like nothing. A hidden structure defending itself draws you a map. They moved within 31 hours, and God, they were fast. Wednesday afternoon, the Ottingers' family attorney, a courtly 70-year-old named Selwyn Otley, filed a counter-petition for emergency guardianship on behalf of Artis, alleging that the father was an active-duty service member with 19 years of combat deployments, recently returned, exhibiting hypervigilance, sleeplessness, and paranoid ideation directed at his wife's family. Thursday morning, an affidavit appeared from Imelda Brackett of the Department of Child Services, stating that the agency had assessed the home on 4 prior occasions and substantiated nothing, and that the mother had been cooperative each time. Thursday afternoon, a second affidavit, this one from a licensed clinical social worker in Fort Wayne who had never met Roan, opining on the general risks of untreated post-traumatic stress. Friday, a sworn statement from Kester Ottinger, chief of Ottinger Medical Transport, attesting that his crews had responded to the residents on multiple occasions for pediatric falls and had each time found a home that was clean, a mother who was appropriate, and a child who was, quote, active and accident-prone. And Friday at 4:50 p.m., in a hearing that took 19 minutes, a judge who golfed with nobody in particular, but who lived in a county with one ambulance service, granted temporary guardianship to the mother, entered a no-contact provision as to the father pending evaluation, and had a bailiff escort Roan Kittredge out of the courthouse. By 6 o'clock he was barred from the 5th floor of Kirtland Children's Hospital. He stood in the parking garage on level 4 again, in the same spot, and he did not put his fist through anything. He got out the green notebook, because they had just handed him the entire architecture. In 4 days, defending itself, the Ottinger family had put its own name on paper, attached to every load-bearing beam. Kester had sworn, in a court filing, that his crews had responded multiple times to that address, and found nothing wrong. That was now a federal statement of fact about the content of federally billed medical records. Imelda Brackett had sworn that DCS had assessed 4 times and substantiated nothing. 4 assessments Roan had not known existed, now documented, with dates. Selwyn Otley had signed his name to all of it. An artist had sat in that courtroom in the green cardigan and looked at her husband with damp, sorrowful eyes and let a stranger describe him as dangerous, and Roan had watched her do it and felt the last small warm thing in his chest go out like a pilot light. He drove back to the motel and taped a 4th sheet of butcher paper to the wall. Then he did something that made everyone who loved him think he had broken. He started drinking in the Ironwood Tap on Main Street, where the Ottingers drank. He was there Monday and Wednesday and Saturday, at the end of the bar, and he was loud twice. He got into a shoving match with a stranger over a pool table and was walked outside by 2 men, and he let them walk him. On the 11th of September, he was arrested in the parking lot of the Casey's for public intoxication by a deputy who took his time about it, and he spent a night in the Dunnigan County Jail, and he was photographed on the way out by a phone held at hip level by a man in an Ottinger medical transport windbreaker. His sister Cammie drove down from Indianapolis and cried at him in a motel parking lot and told him he was throwing away the only chance Mari had. Rowena Stapp told him, professionally and coldly, that he had just made her job impossible. Detective Coyne stopped returning his calls. Roan let all of it happen, because none of it was true. He had not swallowed a drop. He had spent 19 years building legends for other men. A cover is a story you let people tell themselves, and the easiest legend on earth to build is the broken veteran, because everybody is already holding the script. He poured whiskey into a bar towel in the men's room of the Ironwood Tap 11 times over 3 weeks. He picked the fight with a man he'd paid $200 in Terre Haute. He had gotten himself arrested on purpose, on the 11th, because the 11th was 4 days before a submission window, and he wanted to see whether the Ottingers would relax. They relaxed, and into the space that opened behind that relaxation, 4 people walked. Deputy Hollis Varnell was 26 and had been on the road 18 months and had personally driven Roan to the jail on the 11th. She came to the motel a week later in her own car, in a hooded sweatshirt, and stood in the doorway and said, "You weren't drunk." "No. I know. I ran you. Your PBT was zeros, and I wrote it down, and my sergeant told me the machine was broken, and to fix the report." She was shaking. "I didn't fix it. I've got the original in my personal email." Merlene Ackley was 61, and had a boy named Bartlett, who everyone had called Barty, and Barty had been 6 years old in the spring of 2023, when he was found at the bottom of the basement stairs at his aunt's house on a Sunday afternoon. Ottinger Medical Transport had responded. Kester had run the code. Ephraim Ottinger, coroner, had signed it out as an accidental fall, and there had been no autopsy, because in Indiana the coroner decides. He'd had a broken arm in the January, Merlene said, sitting on the end of the motel bed with her purse in her lap, and a broken collarbone in the fall. Before, and I asked 3 people, and every one of them said, "Children fall," and I have said that back to myself for 3 years, like it was a prayer, and it is not a prayer, Mr. Kittredge. It's what they say. And on the last night of September, at 11 o'clock, Dermot Coyne knocked on the door of Unit 14 at the Route 30 motel, carrying a cardboard file box with the top taped down. He put it on the table, and stood there with his hands in his coat pockets. 6 years, he said. Everything that ever came in and died. The Ackley boy. 2 nursing home deaths in 2019 that got signed out in under an hour. 9 screened-out hotline calls on 4 different children in that family's orbit, and a memo I wrote in 2021 that my sheriff told me to unwrite. Roan looked at the box. Why now? Coin shrugged, and this time it wasn't the small defeated one. Because a man came into my office and said the thing I've wanted to hear somebody say for 6 years, he said. And then he went out and made the whole county think he was a drunk, which means he's not a hothead, which means he's building something. He nodded at the box. I've been keeping score for a long time, son. I just never had anybody to hand the scorecard to. Ransom Isley came into the motel room on the 2nd of October, looked at the 4 sheets of butcher paper on the wall, and said, well, there he is. They had shared a plywood room in 3 countries. Isley had left the unit at 34 with a bad hip and a law degree he'd finished at night, and he was now a special agent assigned to a healthcare fraud strike force out of the Southern District of Indiana, which is a sentence that makes people's eyes glaze at parties, and which meant, in practice, that Ransom Isley spent his days taking apart small medical businesses that stole from the government. He stood in front of the wall for 11 minutes without speaking. Roan let him. The stars are the child's, Isley said at last. Yes. And the middle column is the radiology. Yes. And this, Isley said, tapping the right-hand sheet, where Effie's 11 months of run reports had been transcribed by hand into a grid of dates and run numbers and dollar amounts, is what they got paid for it. $41.80 a run, Roan said, times 41 runs on my daughter, times, we think, 600 and change across the county, because if you'll do it to a 9-year-old, you'll do it to a nursing home. Isley turned around slowly. Rowan, he said, I want to be very careful here, because you're my brother, and because I'm a federal agent standing in a room with a wall. Tell me what you're going to do. I'm going to give you a target package, Rowan said. The good kind. The kind you don't have to work for. And after I'm going to be standing where the pattern puts them. Isley took a long breath. If you kill somebody, I can't help you. I'm not going to kill anybody, Roan said, and he meant it. And Isley, who had watched him work for a decade, believed him, because Roan Kittredge had never in his life needed to. I'm going to take away the only thing they've ever had. Which is? They're the ones who decide what happened, Roan said. Every time. In that county, the Ottingers write the story. That's their whole power. I'm going to be the one holding the pen for 1 hour, in their building, on their radio, in front of everyone they've spent 40 years impressing. He smiled, and it was not a nice thing to see. And then I'm going to hand them to you. 2 more people came, quietly, on leave, and slept on the motel floor. Master Sergeant Hamish Rives was a signals man who could make a radio do things that were arguably illegal in 9 states and definitively legal in none. Sergeant First Class Zelda Otway had been the unit's best analyst for 6 years and had once found a man because of the brand of yogurt he bought. They arrived within a day of each other, in civilian trucks, and neither of them asked Roan a single question about his feelings. For 19 days, the 4 of them built pattern of life on 6 Ottingers. It is not glamorous work. It is a man in a parked car with a thermos, and a woman with 3 phones and a spreadsheet. And it is boring in a way that would break most people, and it produces the following. Ephraim Ottinger left his house at 6:40 every weekday and ate breakfast at the Yerby Grill and sat in the 3rd booth. And on the 2nd Tuesday of every month, he drove to Fort Wayne and did not use a card for anything. Tildy ran the benevolence fund out of a 2nd Redeemer office with a filing cabinet she did not lock. Kester was on the schedule Monday through Thursday and slept at the station 4 nights out of 5 and had, in 11 years, never missed a shift. Quaid submitted claims from a desktop computer in the back office of the ambulance barn on a network with a router whose administrator password was, when Rives finally got a look at it, Ottinger 1978. Torin coached Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, 6 to 8, and had a key to the rec center, and left the recording light on in the wrestling room because the camera had been installed by a grant and nobody had ever thought about it once since. And artist Kittredge visited her daughter every day at 2 p.m. for exactly 40 minutes, and never at any other time, and on the way out she stopped at the gift shop and bought nothing. But the thing that finished it, the thing that turned a case into an operation, happened on the 19th of October, at 9:20 at night, on the county road between Yerby and the state highway. Roan was driving back from Indianapolis, where he had spent 2 hours in a hospital parking lot he was not allowed to enter, when headlights came up behind him. Not high beams, the specific stacked pattern of an ambulance running dark, no light bar, no siren, a heavy chassis, a diesel that shifts late. He watched it in the mirror for a quarter mile and thought, with a kind of distant professional interest, well, there it is. It came alongside on a stretch, with a ditch on the right and a culvert coming up in 300 yards, and it came over. Roan had spent 19 years in vehicles driven by men trying to make him dead, and he did the one thing that saves your life, which is that he did not brake. He accelerated into the gap, took the hit on the rear quarter instead of the door, let the truck come around, and rode it off into the beans with all four wheels turning, and came to a stop upright, facing back the way he had come, with his headlights full on the rig as it went by. Unit 4, Ottinger Medical Transport, no lights, doing 70. He sat there in the beans with the engine running and his hands perfectly steady on the wheel, and he laughed once, out loud, in the dark, because they had just given him the last piece he was missing. Not evidence. He didn't need evidence. Isley had subpoenas now. They had given him urgency, and they had given him the truth about what they were. Not monsters, not masterminds. Frightened men who had never once in their lives had to do a hard thing where somebody was watching. He called Rives from the field. They tried it, he said. Tonight, Unit 4. There was a pause on the line. Are you hurt? No. Do we move it up? Roan looked at the sky over Dunnigan County, which was very clear and very full of stars. No, he said. We do it on the 12th. They'll all be in one room. They'll all be in their good clothes. And Ephraim's getting an award. The Dunnigan County Fire and Ice Banquet is held every November in the equipment bay of the Ottinger barn, because it is the biggest heated room in the county. They roll the 2 rigs outside. They put down 40 round tables. They string lights across the beams. And 400 people eat ham and scalloped potatoes off paper plates and clap for one another. On the 12th, Ephraim Ottinger was to receive a Lifetime of Service award from the county commissioners, with a slideshow. 6 weeks before that, Kester Ottinger had a problem, which is that the barn's ancient camera system had failed its insurance inspection, and the radio repeater on the roof had been dropping the north end of the county since spring. He complained about it, loudly, in the 3rd booth at the Yerby Grill, where a man named Ephraim ate breakfast every morning, and where, on a Thursday, a quiet contractor from Logansport happened to be having eggs. The contractor's name, on his card, was H. Rives. He did low-voltage work. Cameras, access control, 2-way radio. He'd done the fire station in Peru and the co-op in Royal Center. He could do the barn for cost if they'd let him put his sign in the lot, and he could have it done before the banquet. Kester Ottinger shook his hand and felt, for a moment, like a man who was good at his job. Over the next 5 weeks, Hamish Rives replaced 14 cameras, a network video recorder, the door controllers on the bay and the office, the paging encoder, and the roof repeater on a building owned by a family that had never in its life had to consider that a stranger's kindness might be aimed at them. He did excellent work. Every camera functioned. The repeater covered the north end for the first time in 2 years. Kester paid him in 3 checks and recommended him to the school corporation. And in a rented storage unit in Logansport, a laptop sat on a shelf and quietly kept a second copy of every key. Meanwhile, at Kirtland Children's Hospital, Maribel Kittredge came off the ventilator on the 29th of October. Roan learned it by text from Keturah Nagel, who had taken to sending him 1 line a day from a personal phone in violation of at least 4 policies. She's breathing on her own. He read it in a truck in a soybean field and put his forehead against the steering wheel for a while. 2 days later, Nagel sent another one, and this is the one he kept. She asked for the ceiling. Roan called Cammy. Cammy, who was a hospice nurse and therefore a person who knew how to get into places, went up to the 5th floor with a bag of glow-in-the-dark stars from a Dollar General on Shadeland Avenue, and told a charge nurse a story, and taped 206 white stars to the ceiling tiles above bed 9 in a pattern she had been sent as a photograph. No red ones. Cammy had asked about that. Not one, Roan had said. And there was one more thing that came loose in those weeks, and it came from Artis herself, which nobody expected. She called him. It was the 4th of November, 11 at night, and she was drunk in a way she never got, and she talked for 19 minutes, while Roan sat on the edge of a motel bed and recorded every second of it under Indiana's one-party consent law. She did not confess. She was not built for that. What she did was explain. She told him about a rubber mat in a different basement in 1997, and about being 7, and about her father counting. She told him that Kester had gotten it worst, and that Torin had gotten it least, and that the way you survived was to be useful. She told him that when Mari was 5 and started lying about small things, Tildy had said the wood's still green, and that Artis had thought, with something that felt at the time like relief, oh, this is just what a family is. I wasn't going to let it be like it was for me, she said. It was going to be less. I made it less. You scheduled it, Roan said. I organized it. Her voice was thick and perfectly certain. You don't understand. Uncontrolled is how children die. I made it. Regular. I made it so it was over with. Twice a month. And the rest of the time she was fine. Roan, she was fine. We watched movies. $41.80, he said. Silence on the line. That's what the run pays, Roan said. Did you know the number, or did you just know there was one? She hung up. He sat there for a long time in the dark. Then he wrote the date and the time in the green notebook, and under it, in the small square capitals, the last line of the file. Motive established. Subject is not sorry. Subject is proud of the restraint. He closed the notebook and went to sleep, and he slept fine, which he understood was not something he should say out loud to anybody, ever. The ice came in on the 11th, which was luck, and Roan took it the way you take weather in an operation, gratefully and without changing anything. By 7 on the evening of the 12th, there were 390 people in the equipment bay of the Ottinger barn. The rigs were outside under a skin of freezing rain. There were lights in the beams and ham on the plates, and at the head table sat Ephraim and Tildy Ottinger, and Kester in his dress uniform, and Quaid in a suit he'd had since 2014, and Torin, and Artis in the green cardigan. Detective Dermot Coyne was at table 19 in a sport coat. Deputy Hollis Varnell was at table 31, off duty, with her hands in her lap. Merlene Ackley was at table 4 with 2 other women from her church. Effie Ottinger was where she was supposed to be, at the family table, sitting very straight. And a mile east, at the bottom of the lane, 3 unmarked federal vehicles and a county line trooper unit sat with their engines running in the ice, holding on Ransom Isley's word, with warrants signed that afternoon by a magistrate in Indianapolis for Ottinger Medical Transport, Redbird Billing Solutions LLC, and 6 individuals. At 7:52 p.m., the county commissioner at the microphone said, "And now, a man who needs no introduction in this county," and the lights went down for the slideshow. At 7:53, every light in the building went out. Not the emergency lights. Those came up, red and low, exactly the way they were supposed to, because Hamish Rives had tested them in September. The room made the sound a crowd makes, a rising ooh, a few laughs, somebody's phone flashlight. Kester Ottinger stood up, because that is what a chief does, and started toward the office to reset the panel, and found that the office door would not open, because he had paid a very good contractor to install door controllers on it. And then the projector came back on. 400 people turned toward the screen at the front of the equipment bay, expecting Ephraim Ottinger at 19 in a fire coat. What they got was a photograph of a bedroom ceiling. It filled the screen, 10 feet high, a dense scatter of pale plastic stars on white paint, out of focus at the edges, the way a phone shoots a ceiling. It sat there for 4 full seconds in total silence, while 390 people tried to understand what they were looking at. Then Roan Kittredge's voice came out of every ceiling speaker in the building, and out of the barn's paging system, and out of the 60 portable radios clipped to the belts of the volunteer firefighters and EMTs in that room, on the county's own repeater, and it was not loud, and it was not angry. Good evening. My name is Roan Kittredge. My daughter is Maribel. She's 9. She's alive. The image changed. The same ceiling, the red stars circled in yellow, numbered 1 through 38. For 7 years, my daughter put 1 star on that ceiling for every night I was deployed. It was a game we had, and starting 26 months ago, she started marking the ones where she got hurt. She colored them in with a red marker, because she knew that when I got home I would count them. Nobody in that room moved. Roan had gambled on that. A crowd of 400 does not rush anything in the first 90 seconds. It waits to be told what is happening. There are 38 red stars, he said. There are 38 healed fractures on her skeletal survey. And there are 41 ambulance runs to my address in the same period, every one of them a no transport, every one of them signed by Kester Ottinger, every one of them billed to Medicaid by Redbird Billing Solutions for $41.80, in batches submitted on the 15th and the 30th of every month. The screen changed again, a run report, then another, and another, faster, 41 of them, each with the same address and the same signature. 38 breaks, 38 stars, 41 invoices, Roan said. 3 people kept a record of what happened in that house. A radiologist, a billing office, and a 9-year-old. Kester was hammering on the office door with the heel of his hand. Quaid had gotten up and was moving along the wall toward the back with his phone at his ear, and he was learning that there was no signal, because the barn's only cell repeater was a device Hamish Rives had installed in August. And Torrin Ottinger sat perfectly still at the head table, in front of 400 neighbors, while the screen behind him began playing, without sound, a video from a camera mounted in the corner of the Yerby Rec Center wrestling room. The camera the grant had paid for, that recorded onto a hard drive nobody had ever looked at, dated the 9th of April, showing a man teaching a 9-year-old girl in a purple shirt to fall. Roan let it run for 11 seconds. 11 seconds is a very long time. Then he cut it, and the screen went to plain white, and he said, "Kester, pick up the mic on your left hip and key it." Is silence. Then, incredibly, the sound of a radio keying, and Kester Ottinger's voice, ragged, in front of everyone he had ever known. "Dunnigan County, this is Medic 1. Somebody answer me. I need the sheriff at the barn. Copy, Kester," Roan said. "Dispatch is me tonight." That was when the crowd finally moved, and it did not move the way the Ottingers had spent 40 years assuming a crowd would move. Nobody went for the doors. A retired schoolteacher at table 12 stood up and said, out loud, "Let him finish." And 400 people, most of whom had been driven somewhere by an Ottinger, or had a parent signed out by one, or had wondered about the Ackley boy in 2023 and said nothing, stayed in their folding chairs and let him finish. Roan came out of the office door at the back of the bay in a canvas coat with the green notebook in his hand, and he walked up the center aisle between the tables, and nobody touched him. He stopped at the head table. Ephraim Ottinger looked up at him with a face gone the color of the tablecloth and said, "You have no idea what you've done to this county." "I've read your county for 6 weeks," Roan said. "You don't run it, you just answer its phone." Then the bay doors rolled up, and the freezing rain came in sideways, and Special Agent Ransom Isley walked into the Dunnigan County Fire and Ice banquet with 11 federal agents behind him and a stack of paper in a red-weld folder. Ephraim stared at it. He had 1 card left, and he played it, because men like him always do. "You said," he said hoarsely, "you weren't going to do paperwork." Roan Kittredge looked down at his father-in-law. "I said I wasn't planning on paperwork," he said. "I never said I wasn't going to file it. I just didn't file it in your county. It took 11 months to finish, and almost none of it was dramatic. Federal health care fraud cases are built out of spreadsheets. Quaid Ottinger's desktop yielded 6 years of claims, and when the strike force ran the pattern Roan had found, no transport runs, clustered on billing windows, on the same small set of addresses, it came back with 2,109 fraudulent claims across the county, including 11 on Merlene Ackley's son in the year before he died. Quaid pleaded first, at 7 months, and gave up the rest of it to save 9 years. Kester held out until the government played the recording of him keying that microphone in front of 400 people and asking, on a recorded county channel, for someone to answer him. He got 262 months. Torren Ottinger was tried in state court in a room where the 11 seconds from the rec center camera were played 9 times, and he did not look at the screen once, and he will be eligible for parole when he is 61. Ephraim Ottinger was removed as coroner by the state within 4 weeks. He was convicted of conspiracy and of obstruction, and he died of a stroke in a federal medical center in Kentucky, 18 months into his sentence, and no one in Donegan County claimed the body for 6 days. Bartlett Ackley was exhumed on a cold morning in March. There was a healed spiral fracture of the left humerus that no one had ever documented, and a skull injury inconsistent with a fall down carpeted stairs, and the manner of death was amended from accident to homicide. Merlene Ackley stood at the edge of the county cemetery in a good coat and said, "To no one, there you are." Imelda Brackett resigned. Sheriff Foy Brackett lost by 400 votes to Hollis Varnell, who was 27 by then, and who ran on a single sentence printed on a yard sign, "Every call gets a record." Dermot Coyne testified for 2 days, retired, and gave Roan the empty file box with the tape still on it, which Roan kept. Artis Kittredge pleaded to neglect of a dependent resulting in serious bodily injury and to conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud, and was sentenced to 22 years and asked, through her attorney, for 1 supervised visit. Maribel was asked. Maribel said no. Nobody argued with her about it. And Roan took his discharge at 19 years and 8 months, which cost him a pension he'd bled for, and moved with his daughter to a rented house outside Indianapolis, with a hospital 40 minutes away, and a physical therapist named Effie Ottinger's old cadet instructor, and a yard big enough for a dog. Mari came home in the spring, after 2 more surgeries and a summer of learning to hold a pencil again. The first thing she asked for was the ladder. He held it while she went up, and she put the stars on the ceiling of the new room herself, one at a time, taking most of an afternoon over it. He didn't help, and he didn't count. When she was done, she came down and stood next to him, and they both looked up at it. "That's all of them," she said. "There's no red." "No," he said, "because you came home." Roan Kittredge, who had spent 19 years learning to read the pattern of a stranger's life from the small things they left behind, looked at his daughter's ceiling and understood that the only file that had ever mattered had been written by a 9-year-old with a marker, in a code he'd taught her when she was 2, on the one surface in that house that nobody ever bothered to look at. "Because you kept the count," he said. "I just read it. So that's the story, and I want to leave you with the part that's been rattling around in me since I finished writing it. The Ottingers weren't geniuses. That's the thing people get wrong about how this stuff survives. There was no mastermind in that family. There was a family that happened to hold every job that produces a record, and once you hold all of those jobs, you don't have to be clever. You just have to be the only one talking." 2 hotline calls got screened out. 4 assessments found nothing. 3 separate agencies looked directly at a child with 38 broken bones, and each one of them asked the same closed circle of people what happened, and each one of them got the same answer, and wrote it down, and went home. And here's the second thing, and this is the one I actually want you to take with you. Mari didn't tell anyone. Not because she was too scared, though she was. She was never given a single adult who wasn't inside that circle. No teacher, no school nurse, no coach who wasn't her uncle. So she did what kids do when the door is locked. She found the one channel nobody was watching, and she used it, for 2 years, patiently, in a language exactly one person on Earth could read. Every child who is being hurt is broadcasting. Almost always. The signal is small and weird and easy to file under. Kids are dramatic. The long sleeves in August, the flinch, the drawings, the way they suddenly stop wanting to go to one specific house. A ceiling full of red stars is just a version of that you can count. So be the outside person. Be the aunt who asks a second question. Be the coach who notices. And if you're ever the one adult a kid picks, do not make them explain it twice. Thanks for staying with me. If this one landed, you know what to do, and I'll see you in the next story.